The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Evers, and welcome to another edition of Humanity First. We've got a great episode lined up today. It's the 4th of July weekend coming up, and we are going to have a very special guest today, Brigadier General Jack Hammond, who many people probably have heard of because the Brigadier General is a combat decorated a veteran, but latterly has been the lead in the Home-Based National Center for Excellence for Mental Health and Brain Injury. This is an incredibly important program that exists because of the generosity of the Boston Red Sox and Mass General Hospital, which I think now is Mass Brigham. And really, the program concentrates on the invisible wounds of war, as you could hear there, in terms of the mental health stresses and the brain injury stresses of those heroes, our veterans of all wars who are coming back to this country after serving the United States of America. And we're going to talk a little bit about the program. We're going to talk a little bit about the recognition of and some of the treatments that we have for individuals, but also for families who are struggling with that. So really looking forward to that. But before that, I was contemplating July 4th the other day, and I have been a citizen of this country for many years, but I was actually born in England. And I was reminded of that the other day when somebody said, do you have July 4th in England? And I didn't quite know how to answer that because we do have July 4th in England, but of course we don't celebrate independence because that independence was well fought and won against the English empire, if you like, by the colonies. And it got to me thinking a little bit about how important that independence was for this country and how successful it's been. I had a friend who I worked with back in the 1990s who was second generation Italian. And his parents did not allow him to learn Italian. At the time, my reaction to that was, well, that's very sad because, you know, the language of home is so important to people. And I got to talking to him about it, and he said, well, the thing is that America, being such a young country, really needed to take what was basically a federalist beginning of the states and make a country, which is very difficult to do. Most countries in Europe, anyway, have had the joy, I suppose, of developing nationhood over hundreds and hundreds of years. Not so with this country. And the idea of bringing now 50 states together and ensuring that America became the strongest economy in the world and pretty much the only superpower was really based on this idea of creating an America that Americans felt a part of. And when you look from outside, you wonder sometimes about that. But actually, having lived here for 30 years, I really feel that is the most successful thing about this country is the ability for people from all over the world, people of all different races, all different languages, countries, come together and feel a sense of being American, which is probably different from any other country in the world. So as we celebrate the 4th of July, and we're going to our parties and we're spending time with our families, it probably is, I would say, the most important holiday for America, and one which I think the rest of the world looks on with some amount of envy because of the happiness and the solidarity that it really reflects. So we'll be back in a minute and we'll have that conversation with Brigadier General. Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Evers for Humanity First. And for the second part of our show, we are honored to have with us Brigadier General Jack Hammond, who is a multi-decorated combat vet and has led many initiatives in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and latterly has been the lead in the home base program, otherwise known as the Home Base National Center for Excellence for Mental Health and Brain Injuries. I will say welcome, Brigadier General. It is great to have you on the show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation today.
We're talking today about something that probably is one of the most important topics in our country. We owe a great debt of gratitude to our veterans of foreign wars, to all veterans everywhere. It is an enormous sacrifice to decide that you're going to support your country, defend your country. And I believe that a country should be judged by the way that it treats its veterans. And I'm, glad to say that this country has a great tradition of doing that over the years. But home base is a very particular program. And it's interesting. My grandfather, beg your pardon, fought in the First World War. There aren't many people who could say that now, but he was actually a member of the British Expeditionary Force that was in the trenches at Ypres. And I had the benefit of interviewing him when he was a kid before he died. And he told me about those experiences fighting the Germans for over a year and coming home with what he called at the time shell shock. It took him many, many years to get over that. He self-medicated with alcohol and struggled mightily with relationships over his life. In that time, he became an advocate as well for what should be done. This was, of course, in Britain for returning troops. And home base is unique, isn't it? Because it really does look at those invisible wounds of war, which I think we've ignored for so many years. And of course, we're talking about mental health and substance use disorder. Brigadier General, maybe you could speak by saying how this happened. How did this alliance come about between the Boston Red Sox and Mass General?
Yeah, so that's a great story, and I'm sure your conversations with your grandfather were very impactful for you.
Absolutely.
When you really put it into perspective, number one, they really didn't diagnose this as an injury until the mid-1980s. So when your grandfather went through this, it was everything from battle fatigue to shell shock to soldier's heart. They had all these different euphemisms for it. Everybody could see what was going on, but nobody knew what to do. It didn't really have a clinical diagnosis. So if you can't define it, that you really can't treat it. And a million and one ways to kind of get after it, that most of which were counterproductive in many ways. And so that's pretty remarkable. You got to have those conversations because, as we all know, the World War One seems to be a fixture in history today. More than 100 years old, so almost ancient history. Yeah. But when you think about World War One and World War Two, 80 million people died during those two wars, which is just a stunning number. Here in the U.S., I think in World War II we lost about 500,000 people. In the UK, it did far worse in both world wars, and you lost back to back 2 generations of young men, on top of all the civilians that were killed with bombings, etc. But back to back successive generations of young men, and family lineages were wiped out. Because they lost all, adult, families lost all their children, and their families ceased to exist after that. Anyway, there was all sorts of things associated with it, but the trauma that was passed on was kind of hidden, and that lends to the invisible part of the wound. Nobody can see it, nobody else can feel it. They just see an odd behavior, and back then, odd behaviors weren't good. And frankly, if you kept moving on throughout history, even as most recent as Operation Desert Storm in 1990, still not a lot on that. And as we entered the war in 2001, 2002, 2003 in Iraq and Afghanistan, when it came to post-traumatic stress disorder, there wasn't a lot of buy-in on that. And, for somebody to tell you they weren't feeling it while you're overseas after a particularly rough mission, the kind of response was none of us are. just get to it, get back to it. And so, if you don't know anything, you don't do anything, and you can't respond to it. Same with traumatic brain injury, which is one of the other invisible wounds. As long as people have been, traumatized with horrendous warfare, and as long as people have been hit in the head with clubs, hammers, axes, and then with the advent of gunpowder being blown up, people have been getting concussions. But nobody's been drawing the correlation to the long-term injury and impact of any of these injuries until this war. And that's kind of what started to set the stage for this. Interestingly enough, the birth of home base did not rest with Mass General Hospital. It rests with the Boston Red Sox. And in an interesting twist of fate, when we broke our 86-year curse, when the Red Sox won that first World Series, one of the first things they did was they coordinated a trip to Walter Reed Army Medical Center to meet our wounded. And they did that after the postseason visit to the White House for championship team. And obviously a pretty big deal.
Huge.
And so they met with the troops, they signed some autographs, they took pictures with the trophies. And then the following season, when they had the opener in the ring ceremony at Fenway Park, they flew up some of the veterans from Walter Reed to participate in it because they made a connection. And that really started the chain of events. Flash forward 2007, another World Series victory. We didn't have to wait 86 years. Everybody's happy. They go to the White House in 2008, in the spring of 2008, as they normally do. And this time they it wasn't even a question. They were going to Walter Reed. And so they did. And they loaded everybody up. They went over to Walter Reed. The 1-hour visit ended up lasting 5 hours. Pretty remarkable stuff. And it was the height of the surge in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had the most catastrophically injured young men and women there that were blown up, hurt, injured in many, many ways. And the Red Sox got very interested in that, and they were very concerned because they were starting to build relationships with people and seeing, a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-old kids with amputations, et cetera, is a pretty jarring experience for anyone. Yeah. Several of the owners of the Red Sox had parents that fought in World War II. Tom Werner in particular, his father was working with the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA and some of our Army intelligence, Air Force intelligence back then. And Tom's dad worked on the Normandy invasion through that process and continued in that during the war. And I think he was affected by the war, and Tom was kindly putting two and two together as he talked to these young men and women on how it affected him. And when he returned from that trip, he connected with the president of Mass General, Dr. Peter Slavin, and had a very good conversation. Tom told him what the concerns were. He shared the insight from the folks at Walter Reed that said, on the physical side of the injuries, we're doing pretty good, but on the invisible side, we're not doing so great. And the VA is not doing so great. So if there's anything you can do to help, that'd be wonderful. And Peter, as the president of Mass General, had the #1 department of psychiatry in America, largest and best, Harvard-based. And we also have the Spalding Rehab Institute, rehab hospital, and Spalding is always #1, 2, or 3 in the nation as the best rehab hospital, and they take care of the traumatic brain injury aspect of the care. And through a series of conversations, Peter met with his trustees. They told him it would be the worst business decision they ever made, but the right thing to do, and they unanimously voted to move forward. And that's where the program was born. Humble beginnings, a small clinic in downtown Boston that treated Metro Boston, Eastern Massachusetts, and as far as anyone was willing to drive to come into Boston for an appointment. And then we moved on and grew from there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really strikes me as impressive, I'm a clinician myself, an independent social worker, and one of the things that is most difficult with people who have served is this traditional thought of anything brain related is sort of suck it up. Don't talk about it. This is a sign of weakness. You won't be considered for another tour or something like that. This sort of tradition of independence, this tradition of being able to manage those things. And that when I was learning about this, is the secret ingredient of the work of clinicians who work with veterans with trauma. And that seems to be something that when you train at home base and when you offer those services, you really pay a great deal of attention to how do you break those barriers of people who have been taught for years and years and years not to talk about something which is destroying them.
Well, as you know, PTS is an injury of avoidance. And a lot of times people will talk about the fact that their grandfathers, uncles, fathers, brothers, mothers never spoke about the war and never really talked about it. And what I try and share with people now is the reality of that comment. Why would they? What perspective would you have on that environment that they lived in? And frankly, all too often, me included, we've made the mistake and let down our guard a little bit and kind of opened up a little bit about what went on overseas with some friends. And it's usually after you've had a couple of beers and, you're talking and someone will just ask you. And, we have a little bit of a gallows humor about some of it. It's a little dark and, you'll share some bad experiences very quickly. And then you realize everybody in the room stopped talking and their mouths are still open, looking in disbelief, and you realize you've overshared. Because they really don't have a perspective to kind of have that conversation. And so that's really one of the reasons it's not talked about. Who would want to relive the worst experience of their life if that in case, happened to be it? And there's a lot of wonderful experiences you have over there where people do amazing things and rise to the occasion. And you try and focus on those. When it comes to the bad ones, when you've lost friends or you've seen some horrible things, nobody really likes to talk about car accidents or train wrecks when they're involved and there was mayhem. And so it's just not something you want to talk about. And so the challenge we face and on the clinical side of this is we've ingrained into our warriors that you have to keep going. There is, and so there's a clear delineation when you get hurt. And we ask people, are you hurt or are you injured? And if you're hurt, you need to suck it up and you need to move on because you need to continue with the mission. If you don't, you're going to place others at risk, or somebody else will have to go out tomorrow and do your job for you, and they may get hurt, and that's on you then. But if you're injured, that's different. You require medical attention, and we call in a medevac. If you're hurt, you just soldier on. And so the problem is, because it isn't a physical injury, they believe they should be able to soldier on. Because we've had so many people that were blown up with roadside bombs that didn't make it or were catastrophically injured and lost limbs. If you got hit with a roadside bomb and walked away, you high-fived. You're still in one piece. You survived, something pretty dreadful. And so when they returned home, there are all these stories of these amazing warriors that are double, triple amputees that have, we're trying to help them and we're trying to get them the care they need. They don't want to try and take any resources from those guys. They want to, they're just so grateful that they came home with all their pieces and parts that they're just happy about that. And they want to put it behind them. And so we have to kind of have a re-education that in some cases you can bounce back pretty quick. And your mind and your body are fairly resilient. And maybe, based on your circumstances, and there's about a million factors that contribute to this. Did you have childhood trauma? Is this trauma upon trauma upon trauma? Did you have generational trauma? And there's certain cultures that have already been traumatized before they even went into the military. And then when you came home, did you come home to a happy, loving family and a whole network of care and support? Or did you come back and you were on your own and you were kind of left to your own devices? And so there's so many different variables. But at the end of the day, if you've been home for 3 to 6 months and you're not 100% back to you, then you need clinical help. And at this point, it went from being what you thought was a sprained ankle to probably a fractured ankle. If it's a sprain, you stay off it, you ice it, you slowly come back. And then, in a short period of time, you should be back to yourself. If you fracture it, it stays fractured. Until you get it corrected, and it requires a medical clinical intervention. And that's where we kind of come in. to work with folks. And over the past decade, one of our most important tasks has been to help destigmatize the care, and really bring it back to what it is. It's just another injury that you received on the battlefield. PTS, post-traumatic stress, is just the body's normal reaction to being placed in an abnormal situation. You're not supposed to be put into a position where you're getting shot at every day, or people are trying to kill you every day in a range of ways. And if you do that for a year, where every night when you go to sleep, there's a pretty good chance your base is going to get shelled, and then it's just a matter of luck. It hits you, it doesn't hit you. There's nothing you can really do to defend against it. Or you're on a base and the insider threat from the Iraqi army or the Afghan army that's serving with you, one of them turns on you and shoots you in the mess hall, or detonates a suicide vest. And so you have this, no matter whether you're on base, off base, this sense of hypervigilance that is just permeates every aspect of your life for a year. It's tough to bring that back down. And then if you did sustain some trauma, or you did sustain a concussive event or injury from an explosion or a collision, you might have a little more care required, because again, if it doesn't all pop back together relatively quickly, then it requires an intervention.
You know what I love about that is this sort of normalization in a very abnormal situation of what to expect for an individual. And I think there's real parallels with the civilian world around that. I mean, I think a lot of people who struggle with PTS and depression in society don't speak up about it because they think, well, I should be able to deal with this, and other people have it worse than I do. But the idea, as you're talking to me, is so great, is you're saying, listen, this is a very normal experience for you to have. It's not that you're abnormal in any way. And by the way, the interventions that we have are more successful than most medical interventions. And I think that, when you think about that individual who might not see any hope, who may be just absolutely lost, begins to see a pathway to recovery. And I would imagine that is really the basis of the treatment that you're providing for people.
Well, the absence of hope leads to the epidemic of suicide. And since September 11th, 2001, we have lost 150,000 veterans to suicide. So if that's not an epidemic, I'm not sure what is. We still lose arguably 20 to 40 every single day of the week. And to put it in perspective, during 20 years of war, we lost 7,070 men and women to combat. From that same cohort group of 3 million warriors that the U.S. sent to Afghanistan and Iraq, we've lost 30,000 to suicide. Almost 5 times the number of folks died by suicide than died in the actual ground combat. And so with that in mind, we know, number one, it is a very complex injury. There is an epidemic of it. We don't have a solution, a very well-placed solution. And so what that really did was provide us with an opportunity to reimagine what is needed and implement new and innovative solutions, which is frankly what we did. And we have a game-changing, and so first and foremost, the number one challenge we have in delivering care for folks with PTSD in particular is the fact that most clinicians don't have the clinical training for this specific injury. As you know, as a clinician, if you are a social worker, if you are a psychologist, if you are a psychiatrist, you are able to treat any mental health disorder. Unlike other areas of medicine where you go through all these certifications and trainings so that you can become a cardiologist, so that you can become a cancer provider. And even within that, there's subspecialty and subspecialty that you're a colon cancer, you're a this type of cancer. So even with that specialty, then there are subspecialties that people go see. Right. The reason that most folks don't get trained is it's extremely expensive for a provider to get certified. So it costs roughly $10,000 to get certified in trauma therapy. And then there's no way to be reimbursed for that. And so there's no incentive, because once you're certified, you don't get paid any more than if you don't. And so too often, our clinical providers are a jack of all trades, treating everything almost like just a straight general practitioner, which in many cases is fine. But when you have those complex injuries, and I would argue that it falls into the complex injury like cancer, when 150,000 people die from it, it goes into the complex realm. And if you don't have the training and tools to deal with a complex injury, sometimes you do more harm than good, because the veteran doesn't know any of that.
Yeah.
They assume that if they go see a mental health provider, they are well qualified to treat this injury, no matter what it is.
Right.
And they're doing their best. There's no slight on those folks. They're doing the best they can in an area of medicine that doesn't get reimbursed well and doesn't get a lot of attention and support and resources. And so what happens is these men and women leave therapy no better, and then they feel like they're untreatable. And that's when they start to lose hope. Because more often than not, we've had so many people come to the program that said, I've already tried therapy a couple of times, it doesn't work on me.
Yeah.
And it's not that didn't work, and it's not really a reflection on the person that delivered the care. They didn't have the tools in the tool bag.
Yeah.
They didn't have that advanced training on how to deal with this very, very complex injury that is so sorted. And I'll give you an example of one that's just horrific that we deal with, is the surviving family members of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
We've had spouses who've witnessed a gun-inflicted suicide, gun to the chin, of their husband at the kitchen table in front of the family. I don't know how it could be any more horrific.
No.
And so there's anger on her part.
Mm-hmm.
There is sadness.
Mm-hmm.
There's grief. And I'm so furious that you did that in front of the kids. Mm-hmm. I hate you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're the person I married and I love most in the world. I'm grieving you.
Mm-hmm.
You chose death over me and the kids. I'm back to mad again. Mm-hmm. And it's such a tangled mess of stuff. They need somebody with advanced training to sort all of that out. And so what we've been able to do at home base is leverage the faculty of Harvard Medical School, Massachusetts General Hospital, Spaulding Rehab, the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Institute, and other elements of the Mass General Brigham system to bring to bear some of the best resources in the world to this problem under one roof.
Yeah.
And our first really game-changing transformation, other than making sure that all the care is provided, is evidence-based care delivered by certified providers, right? So that's step one, is have people that are fully qualified to deal with these complex injuries. We've done that since the inception. We created a 14-day clinical program that compresses roughly 2 years of therapy into 2 weeks. And for those who aren't familiar with mental health and trying to get into everything and get too complicated, I would say most people have done physical therapy for shoulder, knee, or elbow. It's not too indifferent than mental health care. You go see a provider, you get your therapy once a week. In this case, the physical therapy, they twist your arm, work on your shoulder, et cetera, for about an hour. And then they give you homework, just like you do as a provider. And they come back in a week. And then they come in and they lie about the fact that they did it all, because nobody does it all,
Nope.
Physical therapy and mental health therapy.
Nope.
And then you work with them some more, and then they come back in another week. And over a 10 or 12 week period, you start making some pretty good headway, and you move forward. On the physical therapy side, imagine, if you will, if you went to Gillette Stadium, you got a hotel room at Patriot Place, and you worked with the New England Patriots sports medicine team from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, doing massage therapy, stretching therapy, cryogenic therapy, the dark tank water, everything in the world, 8 hours a day for 14 days. Would they get better faster than once a week for 14 weeks for an hour?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we've done. We've marshaled all of the best resources we could in this 2-week period. And so they will get a year's worth of group therapy, roughly 50 sessions. They'll get the individual, a full compilation of prolonged exposure therapy, which is about 12 sessions, individual sessions. They'll get a full 6-week mind-body medicine program developed by the Benson Henry Institute for Mind Body Medicine at Mass General, who've been running programs related to cardiac care and cancer care in support of the therapies in place for more than 25 years. And so that's another supportive piece. We'll do art therapy, music therapy. And then to top it all off, there's a cohort group of 12 people that meet, are together, and go through this whole process for 14 days together. And they now become an active peer support group that they have at their disposal for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
So fairly remarkable. The folks that go through this go from being having a significantly high level of PTSD to just above a diagnosable level in 2 weeks. There's still more work to be done, but they go from basically non-functioning to functioning in 2 weeks. And then we work a long-term strategy with them, and we work a lot of skills building while they're there, so that when these triggering events approach them, they know how to respond to them in a healthy way and move past them. The best description I got from one of the providers was, for a lot of these men and women, it's like you're at the ocean with high waves and you turn your back to the ocean, and every now and then one of those big waves just wipes you out, right? Because you didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
But when we train them and work with them and give them the education, now they're facing the waves. And when they see that big wave coming, they dig in, bend their knees, and lean into it, and they're fine. You know what I mean? Because they're prepared for it.
Yeah.
And so with those skills, they know that anniversary that triggered them is coming. Yeah. And they may go for an extra session with their clinician to help them a little bit more, prepare them, yeah, or after it to just kind of recover from it. But they know it's coming, and they know the science behind what's happening to them. There's nothing broken about them. They've been injured, but it's just like if you have a bad knee or hip, every now and then it flares up. You just got to go back and get a little more treatment, and then okay, I'm good again.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly revolutionary if you think about it. It is applying so many well-known principles in medicine to the idea of the brain and diseases of the brain. It is life-changing, and so many of our those who serve and our veterans need this treatment. Brigadier General, we're running out of time, but just in terms of the future, I mean, do you see home base expanding? I know you're in Florida at the moment, right? And with the program in Florida, but are there sports teams, are there hospitals around the country who are going to be taking on this? Because those who served are everywhere.
Yes, that's a great question. So one of the things we do now, we've grown over the past 13 years. We have national programs like our 2-week program. We've seen veterans from all 50 states and 13 countries, and we fly them in at no cost.
Wow.
So we see the most injured veterans, 2 cohort groups every 2 weeks. So 24 veterans every 2 weeks from around the country are flown to Boston for this highest level of care. We created a specialized program at the request of SEAL Team 6 several years ago for traumatic brain injury and polytrauma. Through that program, we now see the most injured special operations team members, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, etc. We took that 14-day program, modified it slightly to treat the families of our fallen. And this subgroup is the surviving family members of suicide. We have outpatient programs that address all the mental health issues related to military service that include substance abuse, depression, anxiety for military kids, military families, and veterans and active duty serving members. And more recently, what we've been doing, in addition to so we have this great opportunity to treat the most injured people, no matter where they live in the world. We fly them in. So we cover that. That's the national center. But part of what we do now is we also identify areas with limited access to care, and we build clinical capacity. And so we've done that here in Massachusetts. We've trained over 75,000 clinicians over the past 13 years in some levels of care.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, we started offering free certification training in trauma therapy for people that treat veterans.
I did that.
You did, so you're familiar?
When I was at Boston Medical, yeah.
And so now about 5 years ago, we started working in Southwest Florida near JetBlue Park, where the Red Sox have spring training. We had a lot of work going on down there, and we weren't giving back to that community. And so as things develop, we build a wellness-based program down in Southwest Florida. And from that, we had a lot of young men and women that then connected and came to the 2-week program. At one point, we had 170 folks from the 5-county region of Southwest Florida that had been to our 2-week program. And when we returned them home, there was no one to hand off to for long-term maintenance care. They were 2.5 hours north to Tampa to the VA and 2.5 hours south to Miami. They were in a wasteland of veteran medical care. We partnered with a local hospital system, Lee Memorial Health System. They had a brand new behavioral health clinic. We took 5 of their clinicians, brought them up to Boston, trained them here at Mass General home base, certified them in trauma therapy, and then purchased portions of their salary, probably 1 day a week, that they could deliver care to veterans at no cost. So we created a delivery program with evidence-based providers. Within 6 months, one county over in Naples, Florida, the David Lawrence Center reached out and said, "Hey, we heard what you did in Lee County. Can you do that with us?" 5 more people, brought them up through funding mechanisms, found a way to pay their salaries. So now in this 5-county region, we have 2 clinics that we support, we fund, and we train people, and they have a solution to deliver care for veterans at no cost. Very quickly on those heels, Tampa General Hospital down in Tampa, former Mass General alumni who was the CEO, he reached out, said, "I'd love to get this wellness-based program off the ground." And then since then, he's looking at mental health and potentially brain injury. In the midst of all that, the governor of Arizona heard what we were doing in Massachusetts and in Florida, and he said, "Can you come help us?"
Wow.
We follow this same scalable protocol where we identify communities in partnership with the local government, in partnership with philanthropic supporters and veteran service groups. And so in the next year, we'll be opening a clinical program in collaboration with the Honor Healthcare System in Phoenix, where we're going to have another clinic where we just buy portions of their time, train their clinicians, and deliver care at no cost. We're building a program on Arizona State University, similar to one we have at Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers, where we have wellness-based training, fitness, nutrition, healthy lifestyle, mind-body medicine out of there. And then the most intriguing thing is through this work, we found out about the Native tribes and some of the challenges they have. Native Americans represent the highest number of veterans per capita than any ethnicity in America. Navajo Nation in particular, where we're working with right now, 4 out of 10 homes, no running water, no electricity. 3 community hospitals to care for the entire region, which is the size of New England minus Maine. It's remarkable. And so we're going to send first quarter, January 2024-ish. We're going to send our first clinical team down there for a 5-day accelerated PTSD program.
Wow. I mean, so you answered my question. Scalability is so important. We're running out of time, Brigadier General, but if people want to get involved, if people want to give, is there a particular way to do that?
Yeah, and so I would tell you, we're 95% funded by philanthropy. We're supported by a grateful nation of Americans that want to make sure our warriors get the care they deserve. The Run to Home Base is a great opportunity, July 22nd, Fenway Park. First of all, you don't have to run. You can just go on our website and support another runner, $10, $20, it doesn't matter. It all helps. If you want to give more, that's great. But you can bring the kids to the park that morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, be there July 22nd. We have an amazing thing. You can support the runners. The Fenway Park is open. It's free. You can come in there, bring the kids. The trophies, the World Series trophies are on display. And this year, we're going to probably have 5 or 6 Navy SEALs parachute into Fenway Park during that opening ceremony.
Wow.
That is going to be something to behold. So you're going to see Navy SEALs jumping out of the sky. You're going to see all these amazing people doing all these things. The governor usually comes. The mayor usually comes. The owners of the Red Sox are there. So it's a pretty remarkable day. And you get to go throughout the park and get a view you normally don't and see what this is all about. But I would urge you, to go to homebase.org. That's the best way to find us. And find out a little bit about the run if you wish to do that. But there's a donate button, and every little bit helps. We that are home here, we have hundreds of thousands of folks in harm's way on the borders of the Ukraine right now. We have them still in Syria fighting ISIS. All these things still continue, and they need that health care. So thank you to all of them in advance for your support.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is no more honorable cause, I am sure. Brigadier General Jack Hammond, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.